Welcome, everyone, to the Banquet Hall Podcast, the podcast that shares tomorrow's stories today, filled with up-and-coming artists, influencers, entrepreneurs, and more who are tired of looking for a seat at the table, which is why we created the Banquet Hall. Today, I am blessed to be joined with Camille, and we have an exciting conversation ahead of us. Before we get there, I want to make sure that for our new listeners, you follow at Banquet Hall Podcast, share the podcast, leave a 5-star rating, all the social media influencer things that you all hear every single time you turn on any type of content. But it really does help the podcast get to the people that need to listen to it. But without further ado, I want to welcome Camille to the podcast. Camille, how are you doing today?
Hey, Kyler, I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here. We are recording this on a Wednesday evening after a long work day, but I'm happy to get the energy going, and listeners, y'all are in for a good treat. I want to start by just kind of talking about one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this podcast, because especially after going through your website and through social media, I feel like we're on a very similar wavelength with regards to like writing, being a media personality, and which we'll get to later. You just started your podcast. So I'm just very excited to learn from you as I ask these questions. You're the first person from my MBA program, or our MBA program. I can't own the MBA program all by myself. But you're the first person from our MBA program to be on this podcast. So I think I want to start there.
Yeah.
So in 2020, a lot of things happened, and both of us decided that the best way to navigate a global pandemic was to pursue a master's in business. So I just kind of want to start with asking, what was it like for you to start an MBA in this weird COVID-19 world on Zoom? What was that like for you?
Yeah. It's funny because we're on Zoom right now, but in a very different context.
Full circle.
Yeah. I'm glad to be in this Zoom meeting. But so back at that time. So I guess I'll back up a little bit because business school was kind of the thing that led me to move here to San Diego like a year prior before we started the program. I graduated college in 2012 and I'd had a sense that I really wanted to pursue an MBA and go to business school. I just didn't really know exactly how I was going to have the ability to afford it.
Right.
And when I would make that happen, but it was just something that was kind of, there. And I was applying to jobs in 2019, and I saw an opening for social media manager / storyteller was the title for the school that we attended, and applied for that job, got it. There's a little more which to that story, which we get into. But yeah, just feeling like, oh, this is an opportunity. I can work here. I can be a sponge. And whether or not I'm ever a student, like, this is where I need to be. It was a year later that a staff scholarship program was announced. So I applied for that opportunity. I had just made the cutoff of working there for a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was when things kind of all come together at the same time. Yeah. So it was one of those moments, and I was like, all right, this is it. Like, I'm applying to this scholarship, I'm applying to this program. And this will be how I make it happen. But yeah, I guess I'd lived here about a year, and I didn't know anyone in San Diego. This was 6 months before like COVID lockdown, everything. So for me, suddenly being introduced to there's like 70-ish, 60, 70 people in our cohort, like meeting all these new people virtually, like I was not getting that anywhere else at the time. Like it was a good opportunity for me to make connections, but yeah, I mean, pretty much everything else at that time was rough. So
Understatement of the night.
Why not take quantitative analysis?
Yeah, what a wonderful way to open up the fall after the world shut down. You can't go outside. and we're inside on Radiant trying to analyze data in a tool we've never used before on Zoom in our living rooms, in our bedrooms. It was a very, very interesting time looking back.
It really was. Yeah. I think like as we kind of progressed in the program, things opened up and there were like other things to do. But at that time, it was like, well, I finished my Netflix show. Like, I don't know, might as well. But yeah, it was really challenging at the same time.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into those challenges in a bit. But first, let's backtrack a little bit and talk about that journey getting to San Diego. So, I usually start the podcast asking about where people are from and what did they gain from where they're from. And I know you've lived in a number of different places. So I think if you could just help walk me and the listeners through your journey, getting to where you are today in San Diego, starting with your being from Sacramento. You are officially the third Kings fan I know, I think, which should be a badge of honor.
We are few but mighty, but hopefully more after this season.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm from the Sacramento area, grew up a Kings fan, and yeah, so I was raised in like the suburbs. So I remember one of my first times actually going to the city of Sacramento and like riding light rail. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. Like I just loved kind of feeling like I was in a hustle and bustle sort of environment. And I lived around that area until I was about 18. That's when I went away to college. So I went to UC Berkeley, lived in Berkeley for those 3-4 years. I was I think they still have this, they call like a spring admit.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically, they let students in the fall, and then they kind of let us in the back door in the spring, because they have students that drop out and basically there's more room available.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was there for about 3.5 years. I desperately wanted to stay in the Bay Area after I graduated. I loved it. First time I went to Berkeley, kind of similar awe of like, oh my gosh, this
So
place is
much going
amazing.
on.
Yeah, there was a protester in a tree as I was like walking around with my dad, and I was like, I like this energy.
That's the most Berkeley thing I've heard on a podcast.
Well, that's an honor. But yeah, I just liked it. I just liked the city of Berkeley and the environment of campus. And yeah, so I really wanted to stay. And I remember I had an internship and a student job that had gone full time. And I was like, all right, I got, till the end of summer to make something happen. And by the end of summer, my laptop literally died. And
Oh.
I was like, well, this might be a sign that I don't have I'm not locking down a job anytime soon. So that's when I ended up moving. I kind of like rode out the summer, applying to things, and then I was like, all right, I'm moving to Las Vegas, which is where my immediate family had relocated while I was in school, about halfway while I was in school. Then I lived there for 7 years, which I always say was 7 years longer than I expected to. Really wanted to come back to California. But it was an amazing chapter of my life. And I think a lot of things that got me to where I am now happened in Las Vegas. So in a way, I feel like the Sacramento area was like the biggest chunk of my life thus far. But I think in terms of impact, like Las Vegas is like a second hometown to me. And I have all my family, most of my family is still there as well. So soft spot in my heart. Yeah.
A soft spot in your heart for Vegas.
Yeah.
And I think I vaguely remember you mentioning stuff about Vegas, like during that, well, I forget the name, our leadership class, when we're getting to know each other, when the NBA was a little less on the quant side and more on the, get to know your cohort side. And I don't know too many people who actually have lived significant time in Vegas. I think usually when you hear about people in Vegas, it's, I went to Vegas for the weekend, turned up for a bit, had a good time, got drunk, came back. But to actually live in Vegas for 7 years, right?
Yes.
7-ish years. What were some of those experiences you feel that kind of shaped Vegas and living in Vegas for you and making it a special place in your heart?
Yeah. So when I first moved out there, I had like 2.5 years experience while I was a student working in our student union and doing like working conferences, weddings, like hospitality. So when I moved to Las Vegas, I thought, oh, well, okay, I've got hospitality experience. Like here I am in Las Vegas, I'll get a job. And I was living with my parents, and um, myself and my siblings were first generation college graduates. So I kind of grew up. My parents believe that okay, you go to school, go to college, and you'll get a full time job. Like that's how it
That
happens.
easy.
Yeah, like that's the key. And of course, like my sister graduated college in 2009. I graduated in 2012. It's always a challenge, but those were not the best years to lock down a job. So I had been applying and interviewing for things for about 6 months when I got an internship. I applied for an internship at a magazine. It was like a free weekly magazine um, that just told you like what to do, where to go, like what shows to check out. They had interviews with celebrities who were coming to town, and I'd always loved writing, and so I was kind of like, well, all these hospitality jobs are not working out, so I don't have anything to lose at this point to apply to this unpaid internship. Um, and I was there for 3 years, starting as an intern. I did like the calendar listings, and then eventually I was associate editor. So I was writing all kinds of things. And I cannot imagine my Las Vegas experience without that and without the
Mm.
people and just really unusual, I think, experiences. Like Tuesday night, I'm at a nightclub before it opens and interviewing the owner about the new like plastic dome they've built so that you can have pool season in January. Like just these very Vegas things. Yeah, I was like um at the auditions for the Blue Man Group.
Oh
I
wow.
remember, yeah, they had like an open casting call, and so I was writing about that for the magazine, and was in the room as they're doing like an acting challenge, and it was all about how you act with your eyes, and it was like just a moment that I'll always remember because it's just such a weird like place to find yourself in.
And the Blue
um,
Man Group is weird in general.
It's a certain flavor of entertainment, yeah. Yeah, so it was that for a lot of years, and, I'm so grateful for that because I love pop culture, I love entertainment, and that was really a home for me to express myself and write, and when first started getting paid to write, I really couldn't believe it because even though I grew up, like, kind of having that dream, I didn't know that it was actually gonna be, realized in a way, and so, that was definitely a dream job for me. Yeah, so I'm trying to think back to what the original question was. I hope that I hope that answered it.
Hey, sometimes on podcasts, the best answers, you kind of get lost what the question was, but you get a good story anyway. Because I don't even remember the exact question I asked you, but I got the answer that I was looking for, and that's what's most
Okay.
important.
Okay, thank you.
But I want to touch a little bit more on before we get back to kind of the media experience in Vegas and some of the content creation. What led you specifically from? I know you want to come back to California, but what was that experience like moving back to California after spending so long in Vegas? And sounds like really discovering like parts of your career aspirations, parts of what like really excites you about media and content creation. So what was that like making that transition to San Diego?
Yeah, so I I'd wanted to, like I was saying, I'd wanted to do it for a long time. I had different ideas of what that might look like over those 7 years. So at first, I wanted to just go back to the Bay Area. All my friends were there. I missed it a lot. And then there was a period where I really wanted to move to LA. I love television. I wanted to be a television writer. And then San Diego was a place that I had never been to.
Mm,
So, really at the time, I was in my first long-term relationship, and we were very serious, and we were kind of getting to a point where we were trying to figure out, what was next, and having discussions about relocating, because we were talking about, wanting to kind of build a future outside of Las Vegas. And so I was applying for jobs. We had kind of decided upon a list of cities, and the only one on that list that I hadn't been to before was San Diego. That was his that was his pick on the list. Um, but yeah, so I found the listing that I mentioned before for the business school, applied, and then from the interview to when I actually moved here was about a 2 week period, which all happened really fast.
Yeah, it sounds
Um,
really fast.
yeah. And things don't often move that fast, like in job offers in general, or even in higher education.
Definitely not in higher ed. I expect any interview process in higher ed to take like 4 months.
Right? When I look back on it, I'm like, that was things were happening. But yeah, so it was like a 2 week period of kind of processing, like, all right, this, seems promising. Like, actually, sorry, it was 2 weeks from when I interviewed to when I got the actual offer. Um, and then yeah, so we ended up parting ways within that 2 weeks of kind of waiting for the job
Mm,
offer. And to me, I didn't know San Diego. I didn't know like people there, but the thought that it would get me closer to pursuing business school, which had felt like such a dream of mine, and really an unattainable dream, I think, up to that point, I didn't have doubt that this was the right move for me. And then when it came to it, you know, I wasn't willing to like stay behind and say no to this opportunity,
mm.
even though, it felt risky. You're moving cities, you're leaving families behind. But that much I knew. So I made the decision to move here by myself. And yeah, that was like almost 4 years ago now. But yeah, I moved into like an ADU, or like a little casita. Um, I called it the she shed. So that was my little soft place to land. But yeah, like basically weeks at like, I don't know, in the middle of a breakup really, and starting a new job, and just kind of, I think from there, almost like cracking an egg open.
Mm.
You're like, oh, it's super messy, but like, now this egg is, I don't know, going to become something delicious. Or now it can transform. I don't know. I'm still working on the metaphor, but
We'll workshop it. We'll workshop. I felt I was with you. I felt where we were going with it. I think that's what matters.
yeah. I used to say like, oh, I feel like someone threw me in a washing machine, and you like tumble around, like, tumble around, and then I got spat out, and now I'm soaking wet, and I'm trying to figure out how to dry off. Like,
Mm, I like
okay,
that.
these things have been like, shaken up. I'm here. Now what the heck do I do?
Now what the heck do we do? And it's kind of like, I guess we're figuring out if we're scrambling the eggs, if we're doing over hard, if we're doing eggs Benedict.
There
There's a
you
lot you could
go.
do once you crack that egg. We'll
There
work
you
on the
go.
metaphor together.
Thank you, Kyler. You helped me out there.
Hey, that's what writers do. We help each other out. But thinking back now, it's been 4 years since coming to San Diego. You have your MBA now. I think we can pause to congratulate both of us on finishing a master's that was
Yes.
half on Zoom, half in person, fully complex, but we did it. So when you look back at Camilla 4 years ago, but also just Camille, who you are as a person holistically, what does it mean, especially as a first generation college student, to say that you have your MBA now?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I think the process of earning the degree and going through this program, and maybe even working for the first time in higher education, was something that revealed to me that impact, I think, of being a first generation college graduate. Like, I knew it when I was in undergrad. I remember like walking with my classmates one day, and someone just casually mentioning like, "Oh yeah, when my grandpa went to college." And the thought in my head was like, your grandpa went to college,
Yeah,
like
like that's possible.
this newfangled thing called college. It was just wild to me, like that could be possible. So 'cause my grandparents, like, they had GEDs, or dropped out, and my parents have, high school diplomas, so it just wasn't something that I had really wrapped my head around. Um, and now I think it's really impacted me to wanna, I think, connect with other people who are the first time, going after their bachelor's or their master's, because there's a lot that you don't know until you get there, and then you're like, "Oh, I don't know what I don't know." Um, and yeah, I think I've had a lot of, reflecting and processing, like, this chapter of life is the first time that, like, I've been in therapy regularly,
Mm,
and that's been a space that I can really kind of peel back some layers and get to know myself better, and then figure out, like, you know, what do I wanna do with, you know, the experiences that I've kind of just been carrying around? How do I wanna connect with other people and let them know that, like, they're not the only one that's going
mm.
through it? Yeah.
Yeah, the big question of how to make everything connect. I think that that's one that I think about very frequently. My first job in higher education was working for undergraduate admissions. And so I would have the bright eyed first gen college or high school students come up to the table like, oh, like, what can I do with a biology major? And now, like in retrospect, I'm like, what can't you do with a biology major? That's the question I need you to answer for yourselves. And I think that I mean the MBA is very fresh for us. I mean, we haven't even crossed the stage really yet. But I think that we'll start to just see just the fruits of all of that labor over the last couple of years and all the things that we learned from the MBA program, the connections that we're making. And yeah, I'm looking forward to looking back on this podcast 7 years from now. We're like, oh wow, like we talked about the MBA in this way, but this is how the egg ended up getting scrambled, and this is how the full breakfast plate looks 7 years later.
Carrying that metaphor with us. I love it. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's really hard to sometimes know what you're in while you're in it. Or even like, I think I'm someone that sometimes I try to make meaning of everything,
Mm,
and I'll try to do it like while I'm in it. What am I supposed to learn right now? And you can't always do that. But I think it's important. And one thing I've learned is to try and like give myself space,
mm,
to do nothing, to take a walk, to just kind of slow down. Because I think um, San Diego inspired me in that way to like, okay, I'm gonna go to the ocean. I'm gonna just chill out for a bit. Like I had been very like work, work, work mode for most of my adult life up until getting here. And the MBA, which was its own thing. But um yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think with all the group projects and all the lab to markets with the MBA. We had a lot of work. I think it was nice sometimes before going to class just to catch a glimpse of the sunset before we go into the 6:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. dungeon and learn about whatever we had to learn about that evening. So I'm happy to hear that you're taking that time to take it all in, but also like give yourself grace to like relax, to take walks. And I think that I really empathize with what you said about trying to find meanings in the moment. I think that might be a writer's curse too, especially as someone who like has done interviews with people. Sometimes you just hear something like, okay, what does that mean? How can I break this apart? What is the significance of that? So I think it's the creator's curse, I guess I would call it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making me feel like I'm not the only one.
Oh no,
I
absolutely.
appreciate that.
Especially and some of the listeners know this, but lately I've been really into looking at like screenwriting and learning how to be a screenwriter. And I think that when I'm thinking about stuff that's happening in my life, all right, if this was my screenplay, what would this mean for the main character? And I feel like that type of energy is what I see anytime I'm writing, anytime I'm doing interviews. I'm like, okay, they said this, what can we really break apart from this? um yeah, writing is fun, but I think it really makes our brains work in very interesting ways, I would say.
Interesting, stressful. Yeah,
All of the
for sure.
adjectives. But I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of your media experience before we recorded this podcast, you gave me a link to your website, and I got to learn a lot about you in a really quick fashion. I really loved just digging through your website, watching old videos of interviews and whatnot. You had a lot of content on there. And I love this sentence in your about section because I think this is really what I wanted to break down. It said, as a child, Camille Cannon wanted to be many things: a chef, a music video director, a professional basketball player, Beyonce.
Yes. Yes to all of the above.
Yes to all of the above. But yeah, I think just we touched on a little bit with regards to like some of your first gigs, but I want you to walk me through, when did you first know that you wanted to be involved in like media and storytelling?
It's funny, as we were just talking about meaning making, I was thinking about when I was in sixth grade, I think is kind of the first thing that pops into my mind. I used to keep this yellow folder that I had labeled on the front, "My Life as a Movie." And I would take notes about things that had happened to me at school that day, and just little stories. I don't think I still have it, but I had some sense, and this was like after we had moved, my family had moved cities. So it was kind of that experience of like being new, maybe feeling a little bit of an other, like, all these kids know each other. I think that was when I really started to get an interest in like writing things down, thinking about life as a movie, its interest in media. And I just grew up also with a lot of like pop culture, like TV was always on. We were always watching movies. I joke that grew up like the cable guy. But yeah, so I just kind of like loved absorbing pop culture. And I I remember also around that same time, like seeing Saturday Night Live for the first
Mhm.
time while I was in class in sixth grade. I think we had finished like standardized testing or something, when the teacher's just like, why not? um, and just cracking up at one of the sketches. And I think from there, I was like, trying to stay up to watch the show and learning about writing, comedy writing, like who are these people that are on TV making us laugh. And that was kind of really the first thing that appealed to me, I think, was writing and comedy writing.
And in terms of comedy, one of the things that stood out to me, or at least that I kind of deduced from going on your website, is that we have similar taste in comedians, I think, because the first link that I clicked on was your piece about John Mulaney. John Mulaney's like one of my favorite comedians. You also have stuff on there, I think, with Aziz Ansari, Seth Meyers, all people I think that are hilarious. So what about comedy writing specifically is attractive for you, or what makes you enjoy the comedic aspect of writing?
Thank you for checking out those links, by the way.
Of course, I had to do my due
I
diligence.
sometimes forget that I did those things, but yeah, that was were amazing opportunities. Um, so I had a sense when I was young that laughter was really a way to help people. Um, I think I had this idea in my head that I wasn't someone that was going to grow up to be a doctor. And in a way, like doctors help heal people. There's like, different ways that you can help heal someone. And I think for me, like laughter was one of the ways that I really um I just turned to it as like, an outlet and kind of that release from, getting a kick out of something or someone making you laugh. So I think it just kind of having that experience as like a viewer, I
Mhm.
thought this is something I want to learn because I want to be able to give this to someone else. I want to be able to share this with somebody else and make someone feel the way that I feel, like watching, this sketch on TV or this comedian online, that sort of thing.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think having that as a background made a lot of sense when I visited another website of yours, skirt.com. And I got to watch I watched a little bit of a couple of videos. You had one on there, Kanye compliments. I think you have Drake says, she says. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about Skirt and the inspiration behind it and what you gained from that experience with Skirt?
That's so funny. I feel the need to say that those videos are from like 2016 or
Yeah.
2017. So the Kanye one is it's very old.
Yes. Very old.
But that was the first time ish that I had really put myself in front of a camera, and camera being my iPhone, my sister being the one recording. So I was I had been writing, professionally for probably 3 years, 3 or 4 years at that point. And I had just made a transition. I left the magazine where I was full time to work in radio where I went part time. And then I had been like so busy for, those 3 years doing having a lot of fun and doing a lot of work for the magazine that suddenly I was coming up with ideas and I had nowhere to put them. And I kind of noticed that, like, they really all revolved around kind of, these ideas of feminism and representing, for women, and then also my interest in hip hop and music, and then that kind of interest in making people laugh. And I thought, well, if I put all these things together, I think there's some room to have fun and to make people laugh. And the first video I did was the one you mentioned, Drake Says, She Says, and I was a huge Drake fan. I think my brain was mostly Drake lyrics at that time. And at the same time, I would be listening to a song and he's like, I got girls that would run a mile for me, like just making these bold claims, which is what Drake does. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of give take an opportunity for women in general to respond to Drake. So I went to like this touristy area in Las Vegas, the Fremont Street Experience,
Mhm.
with my sister. I had made these props on like foam core, like everything very
Great
DIY.
props, I should add. I was very impressed by the props.
Thank you. I just spent so much time dissecting his songs that it was like, oh, I can make a game of this. um, yeah, and we had like a little like mic setup, which was not I did not adjust properly, as you'll see if you watch the video. But and went up and started talking to strangers. And for every yes I got, I probably got 15 to 20 no's. And of
Mm.
course, those don't make the video. Um, but yeah, it was definitely something very new for me at the time. At that point, I had never been on the radio. I guess I'd never been like a host on the radio. I had done like occasional guest spots. So I'd been like behind a microphone, but never really on camera. And it just felt like a way that, I wanted to express these ideas. And I felt like the way to do that was to just, kind of poke fun and at Drake's lyrics, but also like have fun, be in, downtown Las Vegas and not take myself too seriously. So that I did that for probably 2 years,
Oh
made
wow.
some videos. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And what was that like approaching strangers in Fremont Street in Vegas? I know for myself, I think sometimes like, oh, like if I really want to go viral on TikTok, I'm gonna have to be a little bit more social, be a little more outgoing. And I just can't imagine, especially a younger version of me, going up to strangers and asking them these questions. And I think that sharing about the forever yes, there's 15 no's, I think we don't too often get that side of content creation. So just what was that like for you looking back?
It was when I got my first no, I was like, all right, we should pack up. I remember I remember like my sister was right there with me and I'm like, all right, maybe we shouldn't do this. Um and I will say that it was really unfamiliar territory for me just as a person because I grew up being very reserved, like, very shy. Um for example, when I used to work at Little Caesars and I was cashier, so there you call out the pizzas so that they can keep, loading new ones into the warmers. And a family friend who I knew most of my life came in one day and I called out the pizza. She looks at me and she goes, "That's the loudest I've ever heard you talk." And I was like 18 years old. And I was like, one cheese out. Um, and so like me going up to strangers, in Fremont Street experience was not comfortable.
Mm,
But I also really had, I guess the vision. I don't really want to use the word vision because like I don't think I knew everything at first, like up, before I did it, but I think I believed in the concept.
mm,
And I knew that if I, was going to eventually cut a video that was like 2 to 3 minutes in length, I would need, this many people, and I'm not going to give up until I, get this many people. I had also kind of planted cameos because I knew that would be
mm,
something that would kind of help me, you know, one, I would know that, there were some people coming in that day that were definitely going to do it. And two, when strangers see you talking to
hmm.
someone, they're instantly intrigued and more likely to agree to what you're asking them to do. So I was really fortunate. I think in that first video, it was one singer in particular, Brittany Rose from Las Vegas. She agreed to do the cameo, and that was a lot of fun. And so then, when it came time to share the video, she was also happy to do that. And that became kind of a thing that I kept in all my videos was even if they were like these man on the street style videos, I would bring in like, a couple of cameos from local artists. Some might even have let me use like their music for the intro, and it was just a fun way to
Oh, wow.
collaborate with like other people who were being creative. And yeah, I think a lot of fun just to um, put that together and kind of have a community that was like kind of all working on creative stuff.
Yeah, I think community is so important when it comes to creatives because when you engage with other people who are in the creative space, you have a shared understanding of what it takes to get there, a shared understanding of how vulnerable being creative can be sometimes, and just, yeah, putting yourself out there, especially as a person who's more reserved, can take a lot of courage. I mean, speaking for myself here, but sometimes if I know I'm about to speak in front of a lot of people, it could take me like a solid hour to just mentally prepare, like, all right, don't mess up. This is what you got to say. Like, take a breath and watch your filler words. But at the end of the day, you just have to put yourself out there and see what happens. So I definitely think our listeners will appreciate just hearing your journey from calling out pizzas at Little Caesars to the Fremont Street experience and being able to approach random strangers.
Thank you. It's fun to kind of hear that circle. Um, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I would people that I would meet that had seen a video, there would they would say like, "Oh, well, you're not who I expected at all. Like, who was that girl on the camera who was just da, 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 da," and I'm like, "There's an on-off switch for that." Okay. I can't do that all the time. But yeah, at that time it was very much I had like, little in my bubble Camille, and then I could do that and go talk to strangers.
Yeah, the persona switch on is definitely it's a talent. It's a talent and a strength. And I think kind of segueing into another persona of yours, some way that you kind of turned on a different persona of you, recently, and by recently I mean 8-ish months ago, you did a TEDx talk at your former high school. September 2022, you had a TEDx talk. Are you participating in life? I think you posted this first on LinkedIn, and I was able to read the transcript. I want to go back and I know the videos on there too through Google Drive, but it was very impactful just to read. So I can only imagine one, being in the audience hearing it, and two, being the speaker presenting that to people. So I think the first question I have about this TEDx talk, and maybe give the listeners just a little bit of a flavor of what that was like, but or what the TED talk was about. But what was that experience like giving a TED talk at your former high school?
For sure. So the talk was about um my Achilles heel in school was always the participation grade. So as a, shy kid, reserved kid, I did not want to speak up in class. I basically refused to speak in class. Did not raise my hand, did not ask questions. Really just kind of was a passive recipient of the information. I was a strong student and I found my way around it, and I would, extra credit to balance out that low participation grade. um, but when I kind of looked back in particular on like my move to San Diego, I realized that it took something different from me than what I had been doing like up to that point to actively choose to move here. To walk away from that relationship, to leave Las Vegas, to leave like, everything that I had there with my family and the jobs that I had. And um, I thought back to that younger version of myself that wanted to just hide in the classroom. And I figured that there's other students like that, and they might need a little encouragement because I wish, I don't know that I would have listened, but um, I think that it can make a difference to hear someone else share their story when you relate to that person that's on the stage. And I I kind of told the story of, being that student and then getting to the point in my life where I really had to, um, advocate for myself and what I wanted out of my own life. I couldn't let it be anyone else's decision, not my partner, not my family. Um, it had to come from me. And really, what I meant by participation in the participation grade is like, give yourself the space, the time, um, the privilege to get to know yourself so that,
Mm.
when life presents you with a crossroads, like, that you're making the choice for yourself. Because I think I for me, it was much easier for a long time to listen to, other people about what they thought was good for me. And, that move 4 years ago was kind of a branching off point for me. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk to the high schoolers. It was really strange going back to my high school. Like, I did not go to a reunion. Um, I don't have like family in Sacramento anymore, so I had been back 6 months before that to go to a friend's wedding, but it was even not really a place that I had connected
Mm.
with in such a long time. Um, so it was wild, yeah, just being back at the high school, like, seeing the buildings where I took classes, those sort of memories that come back when you're, like, in a space, and you had, remembering those experiences that you had. And, um, I I think I wanted to be an example of having the fear and doing it anyways,
Mm. Yeah.
because, like, I even mentioned, I think, in the talk of, like, the fear of public speaking. Because I wanted to acknowledge that, it is scary, and, you can't let fear stop you, because I think, there's a fear that, is there to keep you safe, but there's also fear that keeps you stuck.
Mm.
And I wanted to share that idea in the hopes that someone can hang on to that and help themselves identify which is which in their own lives.
No, I think that's so powerful because I think when you, especially with, I think public speaking, I feel like there's this notion that the people who are speaking, they're so prepared, they're so ready for it. But public speaking, as a lot of people know, statistic is one of the like biggest fears that a person can have. And so I guess the first question I want to ask with regards to the TED Talk, or I guess technically the second question, I'm not sure what order the questions go. But what was that like when you said the first or the last word of that speech, and the reception that I'm sure that you received from the speech, and conquering in a way one of those fears of yours? What was that like in retrospect?
It was it went by fast and slow at the same time. I had never memorized a 15-minute speech. Um, and I did not know I could retain that amount of information. So that was one thing. Um, it really meant a lot to me to be able to speak to students. I think
Mm,
to any, group of students, but also I think for these students being at my high school, it was another layer of, I think, them maybe being able to identify with me. I got to talk to some of them beforehand and say like, "Oh yeah, I had a class there. Or I took this, culinary." Like we were in the same rooms, So we have those commonalities. And I remember um, after the speech, this was like after the event, I was leaving with my family, and like everybody that I knew was, right there with me. And I hear somebody say, "Camille." I was like, "Well, that's odd." Like, okay. I turn around and it's a student, a young girl, and she goes, um, "I don't know if you heard me, but I'm the one that screamed like, yeah, after you mentioned your breakup." And she was like, "It was really cool to hear your story." And it's like, "Oh my gosh, like thank you so much for, calling out for me and like sharing that with me." Like that was really the reason that I did it. And it didn't matter if it was like one student or, any number of students. I was like, if one person feels different from having heard this, like it will have been enough. And yeah, the teacher as well, the organizer of the event, came up to me afterwards and said that she had related to kind of that crossroads moment. And yeah, it was one of the scariest things I think I've done in terms of, putting yourself out there,
yeah.
but one of the most rewarding as well. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity because um, I just want like someone else to believe in themselves more. Like that's why I'm doing it. That's why I got up there.
That's amazing. And I'll reiterate, just reading the speech, I related to it and I took a lot from it. So thank you for sharing your gift in that way. And the other question that came up for me when thinking about the TEDx talk was just what was that like in our MBA program? Because participation was a big piece of the MBA. I think for me, it was a lot more than I anticipated. I'm also the one who was in high school was like, I'm not really going to raise my hand and ask a question. I'll ask the teacher afterward, or I'll figure it out. Like, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to make sure that people think that I know everything I'm talking about. So what was that like looking back at the MBA experience and having to participate in a lot of those classes?
That's so true. It was so much participation. Uh, well, it was still a challenge for me. Um, the way that I thought about it, and this is, on the days where I wasn't like totally exhausted and I was like, camera off, like I need to chill. But I did kind of see it as like a growth opportunity as well. And I would kind of check in with myself, I think. And if I had an idea, like, I'd raise
A little
hand
virtual.
button, or yeah, which I felt was easier.
Way
Um,
easier.
yeah. So yeah, do that, like say it, as I think if I keep it to myself, I can believe what I want to believe about what I have to say, but I also don't give myself the opportunity to like connect with somebody else,
Mm,
whether we're just talking about like Snapple and when they, release this commercial or that sort of thing. Or like in that leadership class, like getting to share more of our personal experiences. Like I'll never know, right? That like I relate to you on that level or so and so on this. Like I'll never know if I don't share that with somebody.
mhm.
And I think, I'm like in therapy and kind of my reading and journaling, like the last few years, like that's what I try to come back to is like, give myself grace. Like I don't have to share all the time, or like I can, take a break when I need it. But if I'm just kind of holding back for fear, like that might be a good enough reason to like push myself a little further.
Absolutely. I love the way that you phrase that too. I think that connecting with people is a part of participating in life. So I like the way that you phrase that. So I have one more larger topic, and then we have a few kind of quick hitters to round us out of this podcast episode. And speaking of podcast episodes, you recently dropped episode 1 of your new podcast, Scratching the Record podcast, rewriting the rules of a creative career. For our listeners, make sure you check out episode 1, or it might even be a couple episodes by the time this episode drops, but make sure you check that out on podcasting platforms near you. But first and foremost, what was the inspiration behind starting Scratching the Record?
It was something that I had in the back of my head for a while. As I'm saying that, I'm like, I think I kind of just let things marinate for a while. Like business school, yeah, eventually. Um, and I had kind of done bits and pieces of things along my, career and the work that I've done. One of those things being that I was like a weekend radio host for about 2 years on a station in Las Vegas. And, being that reserved kid, like that was something I never thought I was going to be doing. I was basically trying to figure out what to do with my time. And they needed somebody to be a board operator. And I remember the program director, J Love, he asked me, like, well, do you want to learn, to be a board operator? Or do you want to learn, like to be on air? And I was like, I'll learn whatever you want to teach me. Like, I'm here to learn something new. And to his credit, he taught me a lot because, at that job, I sat in the sales pit and, salespeople, they've got to go out there, they've got to, have personality. And some of them would give me a hard time because I was so withdrawn. And I remember one of them had heard me like over the weekend and she was shocked. Like, she was like, to J Lo, like, how did you pull that out of her? So I have to give him a lot of credit for kind of really helping me figure out like my voice. At that time, I wasn't really sharing, anything personal. It was like talking, 10, 12 seconds at a time about music, which was also a lot of fun. But it's been an evolution to kind of figure out like, well, what's my story that I'm,
Mm,
have to share. Um, so I kind of had that experience and, figured I would revisit it down the line, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. Then I had done skirt, and when I got to the MBA, it was something that we're taking these classes in finance and accounting, and our program is like STEM designated. It's very like math, science focused. That is not me. And that is not me. Um, And I felt at times, and I think it grew and grew and grew, a bit of a rebellion stirring up inside of me, not at a person in particular, but about the way I was spending my time and applying myself to learn finance and this and that. I was like, if we're down the line and I'm the one that's in charge of this equation, we are already in trouble.
yeah, do not do not ask me about them finance, all the equations and the in perpetuity and all of, yeah, no, do not ask me, do not rely on me for finance. Absolutely.
Right, it's about I think that's a big learning is, like, own your strengths. Like, own who you are, own your strengths, because when we were put into team environments so often, if everyone is the math person, who's gonna lead on that research paper, right? Like, I think just kind of having to figure out, like, "This is not me, this is not me, this is not me. Okay, I'm gonna figure out what is." And this podcast has been a way for me to, like, reconnect with those parts of myself that I think I'd felt like maybe I had walked away from or lost connection to when I left Las Vegas and left, my communities and, people that I, could see on a regular basis and work with on a regular basis. Especially the pandemic too, right? When like everything just shut down and it just I mean, I lived alone. So it was a lot of time to like read books and journal.
A lot of self-reflection time.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of listening to podcasts. So I think that was kind of where I landed, where I was like, these are kind of resources, these are skills that I've picked up. These are resources that have helped me. And these are people that, I've worked with and inspire me, and I want to help share their stories too. So that's where I think those things all came together, was like the tail end of this MBA experience and really wanting to finish up with something that felt
Mm,
like me in a way.
that was beautiful. And so, where can people find the podcast? One, and if I'm someone who hasn't been following the social media of yours kind of leading up to the release of the podcast, what can I expect from the podcast if I want to be a new listener to the podcast?
Thanks for that question, because I have not explained it yet. So I really wanted to, based on my own experience and my own kind of questioning everything, share stories of folks who have navigated non-traditional paths and found a way to like foster a creative career. Because I think, it's easy to like look at someone where they are now and not know what it took for them to get there, like the sacrifices, the trade-offs, the maybe they really put themselves out there, and we think that every opportunity, was just like landed in their lap. No, sometimes you have to really like go after it. You have to get a
Yeah.
lot of no's, and you have to get rejected. Like that happens to everybody. And I think I really wanted to highlight that so that, someone listening knows that a rejection or a no is redirection, right? It's not
Mm,
the end of the road. And you're so much more than like a roadblock, or, something, an obstacle that's in your way. So I'm really, really excited about the folks that I'm having on season 1. So, they happen to all be folks that I worked with in Las Vegas, so it's been great to reconnect. Our first episode was, Kaylin Brown. I met her when she was in college, and now she's writing full-time at the Los Angeles Times. So, just super thrilled that she shared her story, and, kind of that there was a time where she, left Las Vegas to move to LA, and she was part-time at the Times, and then also like working, jobs here and there, just like going after it. So, stories like that, and um, yeah, just kind of want to give some inspiration and give a variety of experiences for people who are still trying to figure it out as well. Like we're all figuring it out, right? So know that you're not alone. But yeah, so we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on Instagram at Scratching the Record. I'm on Instagram at Cammy_can, I think. And yeah, I'll be it's kind of coming out in the next few weeks this summer. So I'm really excited that got so many cool and inspiring stories, I think, to share.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear the additional stories. I listened to the Kaylin episode this afternoon, and just hearing from someone working for the LA Times, someone who cares about community too, like a person of color, because one of the things that I really appreciated, not to give too many spoilers of the episode, but she talked about a story that she did on World on Wheels in LA. And as someone who grew up in Los Angeles, and I never got to hang out at World on Wheels, but just hearing all of my friends always talk about World on Wheels, it was really cool to me to hear the story of someone who's sharing that story. So
Mm.
definitely listeners, check out Scratching the Record. A few more episodes will be dropping soon. I can't wait for y'all to tap in with that podcast as well as this one. And make sure you leave that podcast a 5-star rating, likes, all of that, all the influencer stuff.
Thank you, Kyler. Hyping it up. I appreciate it.
Hey, that's my job as a fellow podcaster. It's the creative community. Uh, One thing that I know you really wanted to talk about that I want to make sure we leave some space for is DJ Cammy. The DJ within you. Uh, Talk to us about the DJ side of you. We talked about media, we talked about doing videos, we talked about podcasts, we talked about eggs, washing machines. Now it's time to talk about DJing.
All of those things. Yes. So I learned to DJ when I was in college. There was an amazing class that I got to take at Berkeley. They have a program there called DECAL. So it stands for Democratic Education at Cal. And there were two teachers, one who had studied at Scratch Academy in New York, and then he taught his roommate. And I think I was walking on campus one day and I saw a flyer for this class, like, want to learn to DJ. And I love music. Like, I just grew up listening to the radio, entering radio contests, going to concerts. And I was like, yeah, I think I do want to learn to DJ. So we had to like do our little applications to get into this class. And it was so much fun. Like, I was just, we learned on vinyl to start, and then we learned Serato. This was back in 2009. So things have already changed so much. Um, but I've always really loved music. And it was so much fun to engage with it in a different way. And also just fun to kind of like bring that energy to, a house party. I did my
Hmm.
brother's graduation party, like those sorts of moments, and just curate, the sound and the energy for those spaces. And yeah, something that I really enjoy doing. I actually did not DJ at all when I lived in Las Vegas, which is not the common trajectory for DJs in Vegas, but I got a chance to do a couple of gigs since being out here in San Diego. It's been so much fun.
Awesome. Now we're coming towards the end of the podcast. I just have a few quick hitters for you. First thing that comes to mind is totally fine. First, who are some people who inspire you, or where do you find inspiration?
These days, I'm watching a lot of Zane Lowe interviews. I love how he talks to artists and really connects, I think, on that emotional level and the story behind the song. I love hearing about that, even just as a music fan. I really enjoy Drew Barrymore's interviews as well. Like those memes going around of her being like right up in somebody's face. But I really feel like she's bringing something different than we've seen from a lot of talk shows, where she's getting at that at the emotion. And I think, I mean, it's inspiring just to see those conversations where you don't really see a wall up from somebody. And I think I'm someone who had my wall up. Like, it's been a process to like, figure out when to bring it down, but it was all the way up for like 20 something years. So I think I find inspiration in that. And most of my life it's been comedy writers, like I was saying. So like Amy Poehler,
Hmm.
Tina Fey, um, Seth Meyers, who you mentioned. He was my first ever interview. So that's like just a like check, like can't really like get better than that. But yeah, so those those people.
And then if I am, let's say that I'm a young girl listening to this podcast and I want to get involved in media, or I want to find my voice in telling my story, what words of advice would you have for me, or just anybody listening to this podcast?
I would encourage um, young people, especially young girls listening, to journal. I'm not always the best about it, but the times where I have in my life, I think it's given me that space to, record what I'm feeling without judgment, get to know myself. I think that's really important because we get a lot of ideas of who we're supposed to be from external sources, whether it be media, family, any number of things, that it's really hard, I think, sometimes to figure out like what's inside of you. And when you do feel it, I think it's important to honor it. I think that I went through a process of like, kind of trying to like dampen that stuff down, and I don't want someone else to feel that way.
Mm,
So I think, journaling, giving yourself that space, for getting involved in media, I would say like try to see like who among your peers is like creating something. I think that's really important, is like finding that community. It's also a way to keep yourself accountable, because the creating it can be draining. It can be like very, you know, um fulfilling, but also it depletes you in a way. And I
very much
think
so.
yeah, yeah, having those people that you can kind of like come back to, and find those people that you want to create with, um it helps you, I think, learn even more about yourself and what you bring to that dynamic.
Then this next one is actually one that I kind of stole part of from your podcast. So I like the way that you phrased it at the end of the podcast. If there's anything that I didn't ask you that you want to touch on, or anything you want to manifest as we close out this podcast.
Yeah, well, great question.
Thanks.
You know, it's one that I I think I need to like give myself that time and space, right? Take my own advice. Um, but I want to continue to like put myself out there. I think like I hit you up like a couple hours before this and I was like, "Hey, like I think I want to like can we collaborate? Can we make this kind of like, part of scratching the record because I don't like talking about myself if I feel like there's no reason.
Mm.
And I think I gotten some feedback on the podcast like, "Well, are you going to like tell your story?" Like and I was like, "Well, maybe." And I think like I'm really in that right now. But I want to I need to remember like, the students at my high school, like the young people that might, come across this or that I might come across in life because that's why I'm doing it. And yeah, I was that kid who couldn't like yell out a pizza. So and I'm doing this now and it's scary, but you do it anyways. So um yeah, I think just keep like not letting that deter me is kind of the broad vision for where I'm headed.
I love that so much for you. And I think this ties really nicely into the final question of the podcast. What did you take away from our conversation this evening?
Oh my gosh. That, there were so many nights we were on Zoom for school. I would have loved to be doing this. But yeah, I'm so inspired by, what you're doing too. And just it's time is like our valuable resource and you dedicate it to your job and to other things that you've got to do, but I really am like excited to see you working on this and really honored that you invited me on and just thank you for sharing this space with me because um yeah, it's not something that's always easy, but to have the discipline and um to just keep going at it, like I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, and well, one, thank you, and just expressing gratitude again for agreeing to be on the podcast, especially for someone because I really related to what you said. Some people reach out to me like, "Oh, when are you going to tell your story?" So I've done like a few like solo episodes on the pod. I'm like, I can't just talk about myself for no reason. Like, what is the point of just speaking into this microphone by myself? But I know I really appreciate getting to know you more through your story, through these questions. I definitely know that I feel more inspired after this episode to continue going in media and content creation too. So thank you for that. And yeah, as someone who doesn't like talking about themselves, we've been talking on Zoom for over an hour and you got to share your story. So one, I hope after this you can relax and drink tea and not have to engage socially with anybody for too long. But two, just yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast. And for our listeners, make sure you check out Scratching the Record podcast. Make sure that you tap in with Camille on Instagram at Cammy_can. I double checked that is in fact your Instagram.
Thank you. Thank you.
If it makes you better, you're not the first person to not know their Instagram on this podcast. It's definitely okay.
Thank you. I'm not searching for myself. I'm not typing it.
Right.
So. Thank you.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely. Listeners, make sure you follow at Banquet Hall Pod. Share this podcast with someone who just share with anyone. There doesn't have to be any specific person you share it with. But thank y'all for tuning into this episode, and we will catch you next time.